All right, let's get right into it. Today we're looking at a pretty fascinating personal experiment. You know that feeling when you see something online and you just have to comment? Well, instead of just firing off a reply into the void, one person decided to hit record on a voice memo and just talk it out. And in doing that, they kind of stumbled into a complete deconstruction of a word we all deal with, whether we realize it or not: decorum.
So this is what kicked the whole thing off. This one, brutally honest thought. The idea that if you're polite enough, if you have good decorum, you can basically get away with anything. And that single idea, that little spark, it launched this whole investigation into what the word actually means, what it's built on, and maybe why it feels like such a huge point of conflict these days.
The setup for this whole exploration it's actually super simple, but kind of brilliant. We've all been there, right? You see something online and your fingers just start itching to type out a response, to argue your point. Well, instead of doing that, our speaker just opened up their phone's voice recorder.
And the process was just 3 easy steps. Step 1, get that urge to fire off a comment. Step 2, stop. Don't type, just open up a voice recorder. And step 3, and this is the key, just riff. Talk it out. No audience, no pressure, just your own thoughts. And believe it or not, that simple habit is what led to this whole deep dive on decorum.
So why even get hung up on a word like decorum? Well, for the speaker, it all boiled down to an observation about a generational divide. They noticed that this whole idea of decorum seems to be a major point of friction, especially between what they call boomers and younger people. For one side, it's a core value. It's about respect. For the other, it feels a lot more like a suspicious and maybe even manipulative tool.
So, let's start with the basics. What does the dictionary even say? Behavior in keeping with good taste and propriety. And right there, you can already see the problem the speaker latched onto. Good taste? Propriety? I mean, whose good taste? Whose sense of what's proper? These aren't objective facts. They're completely loaded terms.
And this leads us to the core of the whole argument. The speaker asserts that decorum isn't just one simple thing. They call it a composite idea. Think of it like a building. It looks like one solid structure, but it's actually held up by a whole bunch of hidden pillars and foundations. And to really understand the building, you have to investigate what's holding it up.
So, how do you take an idea like that apart? Well, our speaker got a little help from an AI, Gemini. But here's the clever part. They didn't just ask, hey, what is decorum? Nope. They framed the entire investigation with one single, incredibly powerful question.
And this is it. This is the question that cracks the whole thing wide open. Not what is decorum, but what does decorum presuppose? In other words, what things do you have to take for granted as being true about the world before the idea of decorum can even begin to make sense? It's like a philosophical crowbar. And listen, the stakes here are actually really high. The speaker lays it out pretty clearly. If any of these foundational ideas, these presuppositions, turn out to not be true, then the whole concept isn't just flawed, it's fraudulent. It becomes a manipulative tool instead of a social grace.
So the AI came back with these hidden assumptions. These are the pillars holding up the whole idea of decorum. For the rest of this explainer, we're going to walk through 4 of them, and we're going to see how the speaker systematically argues that each one is basically a fiction.
Okay, assumption number 1. For decorum to even function, it has to presuppose that everybody in a society has sort of agreed on an order of things, that we all share a value system, that we all know which people, which places, and which events are more important than others.
And the speaker's reaction to this is immediate, just, that sounds totally fictional. I mean, does that sound like the world we live in? A world where everyone quietly agrees on what's important and who's in charge? It kind of falls apart the second you really think about it.
Let's move on to the second presupposition. This one is the idea that situations have an objective context. This means a funeral is inherently somber. A party is inherently celebratory. It exists completely separate from how you as an individual might be feeling. The situation itself sets the rules.
And this is where the speaker connects it right back to that generational conflict. They argue that this belief, that the context is more important than your personal feelings, is exactly why, in their view, boomers are obsessed with decorum. They claim it's an obsession that values the idea of a situation more than the messy reality of it.
All right, the third pillar holding this all up is a big belief in human agency and self-control. Decorum assumes we aren't just creatures of impulse. It needs us to be rational actors who can and should suppress our urges, like laughing at the wrong time, to fit in with a social standard.
So what does the speaker think about that idea?
Well, they call it the third nonsense you take on faith and just believe without any evidence. It's a complete rejection. This idea that we're all just perfectly rational beings who can turn our feelings on and off like a light switch is, from their point of view, just another baseless assumption. And that brings us to the last big assumption, the existence of common sense. Decorum absolutely relies on the idea that we all share this unspoken, kind of psychic understanding of social rules. It assumes you don't need a detailed instruction manual for life because we can all just figure it out.
This is where the critique gets its most radical. The speaker completely reframes common sense. It's not some shared wisdom, they argue. It's all based on fucking coercion, violence. The idea is that we don't follow the rules because we all agree on them. We follow them because we're afraid of the consequences, the unspoken threats if we don't. It's compliance, not consensus. So, after chipping away at all four of these pillars, the shared values, the objective context, our perfect self-control, and so-called common sense, we get to the final verdict. If all of those assumptions are just illusions, what is decorum really? What's left of it when the foundations are gone?
And this leads to a pretty stark conclusion. Without its foundations, decorum isn't a system for social harmony anymore. The speaker argues it becomes something much darker. It becomes simply a series of confusing, arbitrary punishments for breaking rules that nobody ever really agreed to in the first place.
You know, the AI summarized all these ideas in very clean, very academic terms. It talks about fitness, the idea that there's a standard to fit into. Judgment, our ability to tell better from worse. Persona, the idea that we can control our public performance. And harmony, this grand notion that society works best when all the parts match the whole. On paper, it all looks so neat.
But then you get the speaker's raw reaction to that last concept, harmony, and it just shatters that neatness. This quote just perfectly captures the contempt for an idea that sounds really profound, but under pressure feels completely hollow. That contrast is really powerful.
So we've been on quite a journey here. What started as just a simple voice memo to avoid getting into an internet fight turned into a full-blown philosophical dismantling of a core social idea. The speaker's whole argument forces us to ask, is decorum just an illusion, a tool for control built on faulty logic that doesn't really hold up in our messy, complicated world?
And that leaves us with a huge, lingering question. If decorum really is just an illusion built on these shaky assumptions, what does that mean for how we're supposed to talk to each other? If the old rules are a fraud, then what, if anything, are we supposed to build in their place?